My name is Phil Finnemore. I'm one of the directors in the NCC Management and Standards team in the Australian Building Codes Board. Today I'm going to be taking you through the changes to NCC 2022 Volume 2 and the housing provisions. And the main aim of this is to talk about the connection between Volume 2 and the housing provisions and where all of the deemed to satisfy provisions from 2019 have been moved into those housing provisions. And to do that, I'll use the examples from the Acceptable Construction Practice Review and go through both structure and the technical changes for the benefit of the users in the industry. Starting with Part H1, structure, we'll be looking at footings and slabs. But before I start and talk about footing and slabs, it's important to note that 2019, you would understand that we have an acceptable construction practice, that's the black text in the Volume 2 part of the code, and then there are the acceptable construction manuals, which generally are reference documents. What we've done for NCC 22 is separate those out and put Volume 2 deemed to satisfy provisions relating to the reference manuals, the Australian standards, and then limitations, and then reference across to the housing provisions where the acceptable construction practices, or ACPs, have gone. Starting with footings and slabs, it was one of the first ACPs to be reviewed by an ACP review group that worked for the Building Codes Committee. What I'll do on these slides is set out the changes to the footing and slabs in terms of technical content, but also the relationship between Volume 2 and the new housing provisions for 2022. So starting with 2019, Part 3.2, footings and slabs, you can see on the right of this slide the acceptable construction manual. If you were to choose that as the deemed to satisfy solution, you would refer to Australian Standard 2870. Alternatively, and also as a deemed to satisfy solution, you can use the acceptable construction practice, which is the one on the left, Part 3.22 to Part 3.2.5. This is in 2019. A point to note, within an acceptable construction practice, or ACP, occasionally there will be reference to an Australian standard, in this case 2870. That doesn't make 2870 through that ACP a standalone reference manual. It's just something that's referred to as part of those deemed to satisfy provisions for a particular solution. So in NCC 2022, H1D4 of Volume 2, I'll demonstrate through this slide the connection between Volume 2 and how it takes you to the housing provisions depending on which deemed to satisfy solution you choose to take. So if we look at H1D4 1A, it will do two things. It will take you to either AS 2870 or AS 3600, which is a new inclusion, the Concrete Structures Code, as a deemed to satisfy solution if you choose to use the referenced manuals for your design. If you choose the DTS provisions that were the old ACP provisions of 2019, it will take you through H1D4 1B, directly to Section 4 of the ABCB housing provisions. So effectively what we've done is cut out and put in a separate document, that being the housing provisions, those deemed to satisfy provisions that currently in 2019 exist all within Volume 2. H1D4, and now we're looking at subsection 2. This will demonstrate both the technical changes to footings and slabs, but also the connection to Volume 2 and the housing provisions relative to limitations. So if you have a look at subclause 2, what's happened for footings and slabs that's different to 2019 is a reduction in the classification of sites. We've gone from A through to HD and wound that back to Class A, S or M sites only. So there's a limitation now for footings and slabs within the housing provisions to be designed to an A, S or M site only, as distinct from A through to HD in the current 2019 version. Other limitations that apply through Volume 2 if you're using the housing provisions set out for footings and slabs, a reduction in the size of the slab, and this is relative to the reduction in the choice of site classification. Slabs now have a maximum length of 18 metres, they have a simple geometry, they must have external right angles only, and they are permitted to have one re-entrant corner. This slide shows the comparison between 2019 Volume 2 and the new housing provisions for 2022. And to point out here that in 2019, Part 3.2.2, preparation right through to 3.2.5, you'll see we talk about things that are out of sequence to the construction process. Then we talk about the preparation for sites, then we talk about concrete and reinforcing, and then it jumps to site classification and then goes on to details about footing and slab construction. That didn't make too much sense, so for 2022 in the housing provisions, we have an opening application clause, that's part 4.2.1, and then the first thing is site classification, which makes sense and follows a construction or the design sequence. You design your building based on a site classification, and then you move through excavation for footings, and then details about foundations and concrete and reinforcement. So that's the comparison from 2019 to 2022, noting that 2019 provisions are all contained in Volume 2, but the housing provisions separate those out in a separate reference document. For footings and slabs, a slight change in explanatory information. This is one figure that we put in there. It's an explanation of terms, and it just gives details about particular elements of footing and slabs construction, controlled fill, other terms that are common throughout the deemed to satisfy provisions and requirements, instead of defining them separately or explaining them further in each substantial provision. We provided two figures like this just to set out terminology that's consistent throughout the rest of the provisions. It's explanatory information and it's just there as guidance. One of the main changes in footing and slabs is to stump footings. There's a lot of tables that have been added this year for 2022 that you won't find in 2019 currently, and they relate to single and double storey solutions, tile, metal roofs, a range of footing sizes, a range of profiles for footing sizes, different floor types, and maximum load areas. And with all the acceptable construction practices that have been reviewed, anything that's new in the housing provisions, particularly in the case of footing and slabs, includes oversight by a structural engineer. That was a consultancy that has validated any of the solutions that have been provided in the housing provisions for 2022. One of the new sections in footing and slabs, and this is in clause 4.2.22, recessed areas of slabs. We've added some deemed to satisfy provisions there that talk to the recessed depths for slabs, particularly in relation to the configuration of reinforcement. So we've got a different recessed depth for whole of slab depth. Depending on that recess and its relationship to the depth of the slab will determine the configuration of reinforcing. It becomes self-explanatory, and it's a function of that recess versus the depth of the overall slab.